Very good morning. My name is Richard Lee, and the vehicle I own is a 1955 four-door Morris Minor, 8 horsepower engine. She's actually been with us for 40 years of ownership. She's only had 2 registered owners in her entire life, and ironically the first owner was a district nurse. The story was that she'd retired, having completed war service very successfully, and she decided to buy herself a Morris Minor, and this is the vehicle which she bought into. Rather sadly, she passed away, leaving the vehicle to her brother, who couldn't drive, and the vehicle simply was stored in the garage, where actually we found it many years later. Back in, what would it be, 70s, early 70s, my late brother and I were on holiday, and we were staying at a little place just outside of Brighton called Bexhill-on-Sea. And it was there we were speaking to the hotelier, and we said we were interested in older vehicles. Oh, he says there's a chap down the village who just happens to have a Morris Minor for sale. Okay. So we decided to go down and knock on the door, and this chap opened the door and said, yes, I've got a Morris Minor. So would you like to have a look at it? So he did open the old wooden doors of the garage, and there she was, sat in the garage, covered in dust, 4 flat tyres, and obviously a flat battery. My brother and I managed to pull her out. I said, do you mind if we clean her off just to see, what the paintwork's like? So we diligently got some water and washed her off, and then my brother was about to have a look at the seats, and he says, Richard, these have got seat covers on. Why are the seats covered up? Oh dear, what's underneath? Anyway, eventually we got to the seats, took the covers off, and the seats were absolutely pristine. Never been touched, just as they were when it had left the factory. It was amazing, you just could not believe how good it was. We decided, this could be an interesting project, because at the time, yours truly had a very down at heel Austin A30, which had seen much better days, and I was using it for work. So my brother said, if we buy this, you can use this for work a little bit more at market for you, Richard. So I said, okay, yeah, I said, right, we'll go for that. Later that week, we arranged with the owner to go back and visit him, and of course, down to the nitty-gritty. How much are you prepared to pay for the car? Said the owner. So Ken said, oh, I don't know. I said, it's this, and we've got to do this work on it maybe, and I don't know. I said, what do you think? So eventually we agreed a figure, and in those days it was quite a lot. It was nearly £600 for a standard Morris Minor. Oh. Anyway, we agreed the price, and at the end of the holiday, we decided to drive her back to a little place called Leeds in sunny West Yorkshire. We set off from Bexhill, and it took us 14.5 hours to get from there back to Leeds, with the backdrop of a heavy rainstorm and a thunderstorm, stopping at every service station that was open, checking the oil, making sure it was all right, because to date that vehicle had never ever seen a motorway. So we're diligent and we're making sure everything was all right. By the time we got back in the early hours, yours truly had to put matchsticks into my eyes to keep myself open. And then from there, of course, once everything settled down, we got into the routine, we started having a closer look at the vehicle, and it was beyond what we expected. It was exactly as it said. There was a couple of things in its favour. One, it was undersealed. Now, undersealed in the mid-1950s was unheard of. It was a newfangled device. And this, if you look underneath the vehicle, you find it's still on the vehicle to this day. It's never broken, it's sealed, it's retained the underneath of the vehicle in its entirety, just as it would have left the factory. But it was very expensive, £450 on top of the cost of the car, which in those days, you could have bought a Jaguar, you could have bought a Bristol 405, you could have bought anything of that ilk. But a Morris Minor, gosh. And additionally, the lady district nurse, we have to thank her again for this, she actually had seat covers made for the seats, and they were made out of a thick billiard table material. And again, that was another £150. So you can imagine the cost of this vehicle at the point of sale. And the good point is, that's the reason why she's still here today. And she represents the British Motor Company when it was at its zenith. If you look at the broader picture, you'll find that the social and the economic climate in those days was at an all-time low, primarily because we'd just come through the Second World War. And the British motor trade were the pinnacle. They were the people that the government of that day were relying on to get us out of the mess and build up an economy. And this, as I said, is one of the reasons why the producer Morris Minor, the Austins and everything else. The beauty of this particular vehicle is that it is original. In other words, it hasn't been restored, it's been renovated. The difference being that a restoration is a proper nut and bolt application, where you strip the vehicle down to its chassis frame if you can, clean everything, prepare everything, replace items if you have to do, and then build it back, put it back together. However, with the renovation, you are taking the vehicle apart, cleaning the component parts up, and if they're still fit for purpose, putting them back together again. And this is more important when it comes to body panels, because if you're refitting the body panel that was fitted at the factory, you'll have no problem with it lining up with the other body parts. What we did over the passage of time, we stripped the vehicle down, took the panels off, because it was getting to the point where the paintwork was starting to fade. So my brother and I decided it's time for a respray. So we did just what we said, stripped every panel down. We cleaned it back down, took all the paint off, had it soda blasted, cleaned it all, prepared everything ourselves, and then took it to a professional company who applied the top coats and obviously all the primers to go with it. It was a task of time, dedication, because each panel was hand prepared so that it looked its best. And the colour and the shade is exactly as it would have been in 1955. The only footnote is underneath the bonnet, the bottom of the bulkhead where the lower flitch areas are, that's the lower inner panels, that is still 65-year-old paintwork, and it's unbelievable, but it is. And same with the engine. The engine is currently, I think it has 47,000 miles on the clock from new, from 1955. All right, we've had a look at it, we've stripped the inner components out, we've changed the big end shells, we've checked the pistons, the compression, and the only additional item we've done is we've had the cylinder head modified to cope with today's petrol. Because so these days, as you probably know, fuel has ethanol in it. Well, ethanol is not a user-friendly product. It's used in the food industry, for goodness sake. And it's not really ideal to put into fuel because it has a corrosive effect. It corrodes rubber, can even corrode metal, and also gaskets, fibre gaskets particularly. This is a downside. So by having the valve seats, the exhaust valve seats hardened, therefore it protects the engine when it's running on this new fuel. I have to say to date, it's doing very, very well. And the engine just purrs like a pussycat. Just sits down, as I say, 60, 65 in lane 1 all the way down to London. The interior is totally, and I mean totally, original, just as it left the factory or the point of sale in 1955. The boot floor is original panelling, original hardboard panelling, never ever been replaced at all. The tyres are the original cross-ply tyres, and I have to say, without boasting, that's the last set of Dunlop cross-plies in the country. There's no more. So once those wear out, I'm afraid we're going to have to consider fitting radials. But there is a company started up at the moment who are making vintage type tyres. So the profile looks like a cross-ply, but in fact it's a radial. So it will be better to ride on, obviously. A lot of the chrome fittings are no longer available. All the component parts on the vehicle are original to when she was built. We've had them re-chromed, but yes, they are original to the car. One of the highlights, as an aside to the chrome, if you look in the centre of the bonnet, there's a beautiful M emblem, and that's enamel, pure enamel, both with the M and the surrounding colour which is there, and that is peculiar to the Morris Manor split screen. Also on the boot lid is a winged badge, which again is peculiar to the split screen series. Right, well, first of all, it's an 8 horsepower engine, that's just obviously under a litre. The top sensible speed to travel is 60-65. She'll sit there all day in lane 1, no problem at all. The downside is it's good on the top speed, but when you start getting to inclines, you do get a slight fall off in speed. But that's okay, you can cope with that. You drive accordingly within the capacity of the engine. Goodness me, one day, I can't remember when she actually touched 70, daunting. But I have to say, there's no sense of movement in the car. I can have a conversation with someone without hiring my voice in this level I'm speaking now, because everything is very tight packaged. There's no rattles, there's no bumps, there's no squeaks as you'd expect with a 65-year-old vehicle. Everything is so good and so quiet. The engine, as I say, is so quiet, it's untrue. We were out one day at an event, and this gentleman came up, and he was looking around the car, and of course waxing lyrical because he'd had one from new, like a lot of people of that generation had. However, when his wife eventually came along to find out where he is, she said to him, "George, stop it, you're not buying it. Come away, we can't afford it. Come away, you're not having it." "I'm just looking at it, dear, honest." Totally taken up by the condition of the vehicle. It was a daily driver because of my work situation. I was allied to the motor trade and I had to have some transport to get about, and we used it as a normal everyday car. However, eventually I passed my college degree and I was offered a car, a Capri for goodness sake. So the vehicle here took a back seat, and thereafter we decided just to use it as a hobby and a recreation vehicle. And that's another part of the vehicle story. We entered it in something called Concours d'Elegance, and I have to say she did very, very well. With the originality, of course, being there, it gained us brownie points. And she had a nearly 10-15 year success rate of winning concourses up and down the country, culminating in winning the Vehicle of Show at the infamous Classic Car Show at the NEC. where the prizes were awarded by a very young and naive Jeremy Clarkson. Oh, Morris Minor, I don't like Morris Minors, but I'll take a shine to yours, Richard. Well done. And she's represented the Morris Minor Owners Club at the highest level. She's appeared in Heartbeats twice, three times. She'd appeared on Top Gear, obviously, Channel 5 in how to promote or how to sell a classic car. So she's been around and she's done everything. She's also been the subject of an in-depth article by Russell Harvey, who is a top-notch editor and professional person who is also an actor at the Morris Minor Owners Club.